Wagwan people, it's your boy Mo, aka the Hoop Genius, back with another video. Now, if I asked you, what's your next door neighbor saying? Because I guarantee they're not as wavy as living next door to an NBA player, let alone living next door to the Black Mamba, aka Kobe Bryant. Imagine what that would have been like to grow up with Kobe Bean Bryant living in the house next door to you. Now, my neighbors are cool, but they're just some old people. Imagine living next to Kobe. That would be crazy. But if you want to find out what that was like, in this week's episode of the Hoop Genius podcast, I sat down and spoke with someone who did exactly that. And she's grown up to be the youngest ever female NBA agent. So she has some great stories about her career, growing up in Los Angeles, and all these other cool things. So the link is in the description right now for the full podcast if you want to listen to that on Apple, Spotify, or just search for the Hoop Genius podcast wherever you listen to your podcasts. But here is the segment where she talks about growing up next to Kobe Bryant. My question for you guys is, while you listen to this, let me know in the comments. If you could live next door to one current NBA player, who would that be? So I hope you guys enjoy this week's podcast, enjoy this little clip over here. Most importantly, I usually say get buckets, but rest in peace to Kobe Bryant. That's what we're saying today. That's what we're saying every day. You know the vibes. So which part of LA are you from then?
So it's a small town. I feel like a lot of people don't know about it. Like, it's called Pacific Palisades. It's like right between Santa Monica and Malibu. It's a small little suburb right in the middle.
Lovely.
Okay, so then growing up in LA, what's your first memory of the NBA or basketball in general? Because obviously basketball's everywhere. You know, there's courts all over the place. But what's your first memory of the NBA? Were you Lakers or were you Clippers?
So, I mean, I grew up Lakers, and I mean, I was extremely lucky. I didn't know it at the time. Like, I was a super lucky kid. So actually, growing up in Pacific Palisades, my next door neighbor was Kobe Bryant. So
whoa!
I have
what?
I know.
What?
Yeah, I know.
What?
So casual. I know.
What? That's it. I should have done the intro, ladies and gentlemen. This is Kobe Bryant's neighbor. Like, wow.
Yeah.
I mean, he
That's
moved
crazy.
out of the Palisades. But yeah, I mean, there was the top of, like, there's one point of LA in the Palisades, like most of LA, at the top of Lockman Lane. And he grew up next door to me. And I mean, my brothers I have older brothers that were like, they understood the importance of it. But like, as a kid, I didn't really care. But also, like, to be completely honest, like, I was kind of annoyed because, like, my entire life I got Kobe jokes about my name. And like, to this day, people call me Kobe thinking that's my name. So like, as a young girl, I was like annoyed that people would get basketball jokes about my name, that wasn't actually my name. So,
right.
But now I'm honored. Now I'm very honored to be mistaken for Kobe.
Do you have a story about, you know, living next door to him? Because I can imagine it would be like, you hear his car start at 2 in the morning for him to drive to the practice gym every day or something crazy like, you know, because there's so many tales of his work ethic and all of that. What was it like being a neighbor?
I mean, it was interesting because, like, I feel like there's a couple of different memories, actually. Like, there was, I mean, like, my brothers, like, we had a basketball hoop in front of our house, and, like, there was a gate. So, like, there was times where, like, our basketball would roll down the street, and he would go get it and, like, bring it back for my brothers. But then also, I mean, like, there was a time, I mean, this was years ago before cell phones, and, like, there was a time where his car broke down, like, in front of our house. So he came in our house to call AAA for his car to come get, like, picked up. And my brothers were freaking out because they were so hyped that he was in our house. But I mean, yeah, other than that, I mean, there's also times where, like, I remember people, like, trying to storm his house. Like, it was the 4th of July and people would watch fireworks because, like, it did oversee most of LA. And people were, like, all going, like, knocking on his gate, like, yelling, like, Kobe! And, like, he was not coming out. But everyone was, like, trying to storm his house. I was like, oh, God.
If I was a kid,
insight, I guess.
If I was a kid growing up and I knew where Kobe lived, I would literally live in a tent outside the front. That's where I'd be. But
I mean,
so was it
technically Kobe actually did kind of live in the tent in front of Kobe Bryant's house? So that's you would literally be an able.
Yeah. So was it that inspired you to get into the sports industry, or was it having the older brothers, or what was it that inspired you to, you know, because we were saying before we started recording, you know, out of all the NBA agents I met, they typically tend to be older men, you know, rather than, you know, young women like yourself, which I think is truly inspirational. What was it that made you decide that you wanted to go into the sports industry?
I think it definitely was having older brothers. I grew up a tomboy, and I was like into sports, but like really enough, I feel like skateboarding was actually my thing as a kid. But yeah, like I think having older brothers, like I grew up a tomboy, and like I knew I kind of wanted to be involved in entertainment. It really wasn't until I guess like getting my first job, like with like my first job in the sports world was with the Clippers. So I think that's just kind of like after that I was like, oh, I definitely want to be in basketball specifically, because I kind of was open to just doing entertainment in general, and kind of doing like either PR or marketing for it. But then once I got into basketball, like I loved it, and it just kind of stuck.
What was it that you loved about the basketball side of it?
I think it's just like it is a little bit more like of a family idea where it's like you're working. I mean, at least at that point, I was working for like a team. So it's just like, okay, like you're working with like people that you kind of like sticking with like through a season. Whereas like other industries, like either music or TV or movies, it's like kind of like project to project. And it's like, yeah, you may have like those immediate people you work with, but like I feel like basketball, like either it's like within a league, so I feel like it's just more close knit, right, as opposed to like I guess the other.
You get those close relationships, I guess. And also like, you know, when you, I guess if you're working specifically with a team, I think a lot of people don't realize about like the daily kind of comings and goings of what happens with a team as well. So to see that kind of insight, I think it can be quite alluring sometimes, especially having been close to like big organizations. I think sometimes when you see it working, you're like, wow, I really want to kind of be part of that, I guess.
No, it definitely is really exciting. I mean, because I've been on like the different aspects. Like I worked for a league at one point, like I worked for a team. And I mean, at least the team, like, I think it's just like, especially working for the Clippers, where it's like, you kind of know that there's like the inner city rivalry. So even just like the people that kind of put maybe aside, like which team they're typically rooting for, it's like you have like a deep love for the team you work for. So like, I mean, yeah, I grew up kind of, I guess, like a Lakers fan, but like, I'll always have like a love for the Clippers as well. Like, so like, I feel like I'm like kind of divided at this point.
So what year were you with the Clippers? Was it post or pre-Donald Sterling, kind of with that whole, whatever happened with that ownership there? Because I feel like, you know, having been inside the organization and been around, you know, their front office and whatnot, for me, the Clippers now are very different to what they were 10 years ago. Yeah. So what year are we talking that you first started working with them?
So I actually came in literally immediately after the Donald Sterling situation. I got hired that summer, and that's like right when I graduated from college. So like then I just came in at that point, which was like, it was pretty cool to see, just because at that point, that's like when, I mean, they brought in new ownership. They had like they brought a new president, but like even like the rebranding, the new logo, and like kind of seeing how like they basically were starting from scratch, completely building out a team. It was awesome to see. And like the idea of like, oh, we're going to try to target a younger demographic, and we're going to bring in like a mascot and all this type of stuff. So it was really dope to be like able to witness like a completely rebuilding of a team.
That's awesome.
Pretty fascinating.
Because from your perspective now, do you, if we're going to keep it 100, in my opinion, right, because I'm not from LA, but I've been to LA enough times and I know enough people in LA, I don't really know any Clipper fans. You know, I know people that work for the organization, but I don't know anyone who grew up wishing that they played for the Clippers. Do you think that the Clippers organization is going to be able to harness an entire younger generation? Because I feel like they were going for it this year with Kawhi and Paul George, but because of the way that it ended so embarrassingly, I feel like all of their hard work, and if they had actually done it this year, there would be a whole generation of kids growing up wearing Clippers jerseys and wanting to play for the Clippers. But do you see that actually happening? Because in my eyes, I always say if I was Steve Ballmer and I bought the Clippers, I would have just moved back to Seattle and just put the Supersonics back, because that would have been my move. Because LA is Laker town. What's your take on that?
At least right now, I agree. Honestly, I think it's gonna either have to wait till like LeBron retires, or like the LA, like happening. The Lakers just kind of like, I mean, yeah, not at least anytime soon. But like, I think it's gonna be a couple years before then. At least right now, I think like they're just competing against like such a super team. It's like, yeah, they're trying to build like this team as well, but and like I get what they're doing, but I also think COVID, like restricting people even in the audience, it's also a lot harder to try to target these younger kids when it's just like, okay, well, like LeBron versus like the Clippers, and like I mean, I don't know. It's kind of unfair at the moment. So I would say give it a couple years and wait till LeBron leaves the NBA in general, and then I could see the Clippers having a fair fight.
Yeah, it's kind of an unfair fight anyway, because you're pitting LeBron James, one of the most marketable men in sport right now, against Kawhi Leonard and Paul George, one of which the guy seems to want to give himself terrible postseason names. The other guy doesn't care what you think of him, seemingly, or just wants to send mysterious text messages and somehow only be interpreted like that. So it's very difficult to market that, I guess.
I agree. Which, I mean, yeah, I think neither of them are like necessarily like that superstar that LeBron is. And that's why it's just like, it's easy to love the superstar when he's just so accessible and everywhere.
He suits LA in that sense, and perfect. Yeah, and Space Jam 2 is just
icing on the cake.
But,
yeah.
So your first gig in sports was with the Clippers. But, you know, for those guys who don't know, we introduced you as the youngest ever female agent in the NBA. For those guys who don't know, you represent Ron Artest, Metta World Peace, or Panda's best friend. I'm not too sure what name he would prefer to go by right now. But he was your mentor growing up. So your mentor was playing for the Lakers, but you took a job with their rival. How did that go down for you? And how did you first, in fact, meet Ron in the first place? How did that relationship come about? So, if you want to hear more, check out the full podcast. The links are in the description down below. Go and check it out because it's a great episode. Sitting down talking to an NBA agent who's had such an awesome life journey and career path. So you can learn a lot of things from that. Go and check it out right now. But in the meantime, I'll catch you guys next time. You know the vibes. Get buckets.